honor tonight, but I'm very happy to have you here. Mr. Gandhi, it's an honor for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Andras. Meine Damen und Herren, dear ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, hello everyone, also on our video stream anywhere. So, as Andras mentioned, this is part also not only of the International Summer Festival here at Kampnagel, which is a great festival, but also part of this year's Bucerius Summer School on Global Governance. And our speaker for tonight, he needs no introduction. You know him all. His name is Rahul Gandhi. He is the president of the Indian National Congress. But, if I might say so, he is also an alumnus of the Bucerius Summer School on Global Governance. So you might ask yourself, what is this Bucerius Summer School on Global Governance? It's a 2-week seminar for young leaders. And Rahul Gandhi participated in 2005. And among our participants from all over the world, we have several high-ranking politicians, CEOs, and other people. And we are now very glad, and I would like to welcome him now. Welcome, Rahul Gandhi. Rahul Gandhi will first give a short speech, and then we will get into a conversation, and then we would like to bring in you, the audience, to ask some questions to him.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me here this evening. It's an honor for me to come. As you mentioned, I was an alumnus of the Bucerius School. I spent a very nice time here in Hamburg. We learned quite a lot and had a lot of fun. So those were good days, and I'm happy to come back. I'm here to tell you a little bit about what is going on in my country and how that is relevant to the rest of the world. So I'd like to start around 70 years ago, when India was locked up in hundreds of thousands of villages. India was a rural country. People lived in a caste society, rigid rules. They aspired, but it was very difficult to move outside the village. For some of you who haven't been to an Indian village, I can give you a little bit of a description. Most Indian villages are divided along caste lines. If you're a lower caste person, or if you were a lower caste person, for example, 70 years ago, you couldn't drink water from the village well. In certain spaces, certain villages, if your shadow fell on an upper caste person, the upper caste person would go and have a bath. And for all practical purposes, if you were from a lower caste or a backward caste, you pretty much had no mobility in the village. Forget about the country. 70 years ago, something beautiful happened in my country. We got independence, and we started a journey. A transition from a rural India to an urban India. A transition of imagination, a transition in the way India viewed itself, a transition in vision. And India, which had not been moving for a long time, had been static, had been isolated, started to wake up. And a transition began slowly, and then it picked up speed. And the transition was essentially Indian people breaking the ideas of caste, breaking the ideas of a lack of mobility, and starting to move. And it was enabled by the idea of one man, one vote, enshrined in our Constitution. Similar transformation was taking place nearby. Hundreds of millions of people in India, hundreds of millions of people in China, changing their way of being, changing their existence. The idea was the same: urbanization, modernity, but the method and the way they did it was completely different. China did it in a centralized way, reasonable amount of violence, managed by the Communist Party, managed by the People Liberation Army. And India did it organically, in a decentralized way. Anybody could do anything they want. Anybody could move wherever they wanted. China, the Communist Party decided where you would go. But the end result was a massive transformation of hundreds of millions of people. Never seen before. Never ever in human history have so many people changed their way of living, changed their view of the world, changed their vision. And there were a couple of things that were the foundation of this transformation in India. One idea was that if India was going to go through this risky transition, difficult transition, dangerous transition, everybody should be included in it. India should not transform itself for few people. India should not transform itself for just one community or one group of people. India should transform itself for every single Indian. Every single Indian should be able to aspire. Many languages spoken in my country, many, many different states, different cultures, different ideas. We wanted all of them to be included in this sort of awakening, or in this transformation. The second idea was that this transformation would mean different levels of risk for different people. So poor people would face a higher risk in this transformation. They would have to make a much bigger change. They would have to move from a village to a city. The risks were much bigger. Certain communities, certain groups of people would struggle. Certain groups of people would require a cushion, maybe some help. Dalit communities, lower caste communities, tribal communities, minorities. So the idea was that as we transformed, the government should support its people, should help its people smoothen this traumatic transition, this traumatic change. So the government, pretty much all governments, until the last one, this one, 2014, Narendra Modi government, followed these two ideas very, very strongly. So for example, poor country like India guarantees 100 days of work to all its poor people. It's called the Guaranteed Employment Scheme. You can be anybody, any religion, you can speak any language. If you live in India, you're a poor person, you get 100 days of guaranteed employment. Right to food. Every single Indian person has the right to food. The state helps give them food, doesn't allow them to go hungry. The right to information. Doesn't depend on your religion. Any Indian person can ask their government about what is going on. And I can take you back a few years, bank nationalization, designed to give credit to many more people. So these were two of the fundamental ideas that pretty much every single Indian government held true, which has now been attacked and to a great extent damaged by the government in power today. They do not feel that every single person in India should have access to the fruits of this transformation. They feel that tribal communities, poor farmers, Dalit communities, lower caste people, minorities should not get the same benefits that the elite of the country get. And our point is that the risk was everybody's. Everybody took the risk, and we feel everybody should get the reward. The other thing they've done is they've started attacking the support structures that were designed to help certain groups of people. Very recently, a law that protected the Dalit community from violence was scratched down. The right to food was weakened. The right to guaranteed employment weakened. And all the money that used to go into these schemes is now going into the hands of very few people, the largest corporates in the country. But that's not the only damage they've done. There's something much more significant and dangerous that the government has done. This transition that took place on an informal economy, took place on the back of millions of small and medium businesses that allowed people from the villages to come to the cities, to do a job for a couple months, and then go back to the village. They acted like a shock absorber. A couple of years back, the Prime Minister demonetized the Indian economy. He basically said that 1,000 rupee and 500 rupee notes would be worthless. And he destroyed the cash flows of all these small and medium businesses. Millions and millions and millions of people who worked in the informal sector were left unemployed. I want to give you a sense of the scale of this. China produces 50,000 new jobs every 24 hours. In the same amount of time, in the same 24 hours, India, a country that is approximately the same size as China, produces only 450. And they didn't stop at demonetization. They imposed a badly conceptualized, badly thought through, badly implemented goods and services tax, which complicated the lives of these small and medium businesses, and basically resulted in the closure of hundreds of thousands of them. And large numbers of people who worked in these businesses were forced back to the villages. And these three things that the government has done has made India angry. And that's what you get to read in the newspapers. When you hear about lynchings in India, when you hear about attacks on Dalits in India, when you hear about attacks on minorities in India, that's the reason for it. That a huge, powerful transformation, which is frankly shaping the entire world, requires certain protections for its people. And that protection is being taken away. And India is reacting to that. It's very dangerous in the 21st century to exclude people. And I want to give you a small example. A strong example, but a small, strong example. The United States attacked Iraq in 2003. And one of the first things they did was Executive Order 1 and Executive Order 2, which is in common parlance called de-Baathification. But in fact, it was a law that stopped a particular tribe in Iraq from getting government jobs, a law that stopped them from getting jobs in the army. And there was a history to it, so it seemed like a very innocuous decision at the time. It took the United States a couple months to defeat Saddam Hussein's army. hardly any Americans died. Very limited number of soldiers died. Few months after the invasion, the network that was excluded from jobs in Iraq, the Tikriti tribal network, linked up with the cell phone network in Iraq and with the network of artillery shells that were left in the villages. And you got an insurgency that fought the United States and caused massive casualties to the Americans. And it didn't end there. That insurgency slowly entered empty spaces. It entered the empty space in Iraq. It entered the empty space in Syria. And then it connected with the global internet to form the horrific idea called ISIS. And I'm explaining this because if you don't give people a vision in the 21st century, somebody else will give them one. And that is the real risk of excluding large numbers of people from our development processes. Every country faces this risk. If you don't embrace people, if you don't give people a vision, somebody else is going to do it. And that vision might not be a vision that is good for you or good for the world. I want to end by telling you about a conversation I had many years ago with the ex-Defense Secretary, Robert McNamara, which has stayed in my mind. He had come to India and I asked him, what was your experience in the Vietnam War? What was your takeaway from the Vietnam War? And he said to me, you know, Rahul, during the war we used to talk to the Vietnamese. I used to talk to the Vietnamese generals. And we spent a lot of time talking to them. But we never listened to each other. It was only after the war, when I met those same generals, that I realized that what they were telling us was not what we were hearing. And what we were telling them was not what they were hearing. And he said that I wish that we had listened to them during the war. We would have saved many, many lives. And I think that's what is important in the 21st century. You can disagree with somebody, but in a connected world, you have to listen to what they're saying, where they're coming from. As I said recently, hate is a choice. I can fight you, I can take you on, I can compete with you, but hating you is something that I actively have to choose to do. And I think hate is a dangerous thing in a connected world. So what we do in India and the Congress Party, we work with our people, we bring them together, we try and carry as many of them as possible in this transition. And we find that when you actually go and listen to people, and they might be very different than you, they might have a different cultural background than you, they might speak a different language. But when you actually start listening to people and try to understand where they're coming from, you can get a hell of a lot done. So I'd like to end my talk by telling you that I think there is a lot of hatred in the world today, but there is not enough listening. And I think listening is something that is very, very powerful. So thank you for coming here.
Thank you so much. I think there will be lots of questions from the audience, but let me go first. Okay. Because your last example was very interesting, talking about hate, because in these times we are talking a lot about hate speech and politics, especially when I follow you on Twitter. Yeah, I see a lot of hate speech. I see it with every politician. And
me doing the hate speech?
No, not you doing, not you. The comments, Sorry,
yeah, no. Just making sure.
No, I think to listen to each other is very important, but there were times where there was no need to mention it. And also, I remember some weeks ago, there was a discussion in the Indian parliament where were you making slightly the same point in the debate about that not only fighting against hate is important, but also love. And at the end of the debate, you went over to Prime Minister Modi and you hugged him.
Yeah, because
And maybe you would like to comment on that.
no, it's, you see, non-violence in India is a foundational philosophy. It's a foundational philosophy of our nationhood. It's a foundational philosophy of our entire history. That's the essence of being Indian, is to be non-violent. And the basic idea is this, that if someone hates you, that is something that they're doing. Hate is, it is their internal emotion, it is their reaction to the world. Responding to their hate with hate is quite foolish. It's not going to solve any problem. And you're in full control of how you respond to things. The only thing really you control is how you respond to things. So when the Prime Minister was making sort of hateful remarks at me, I was feeling that I needed to go in, give him a hug and tell him the world is not such a bad place and it is not all evil out there and that there are many people who actually have a lot of affection, and I give him a hug.
Thank you. Now,
He didn't like that. He didn't like that because, no, Gandhiji actually wrote it. You see, he said that the only way you can counter hate is through love. You can't counter hate with hate because it just increases the hate. And when I actually went and showed affection to the Prime Minister, he was taken aback. He was upset by it. But it works. It really does.
also, it was quite unusual and a real surprise, and I also think a real surprise also to the members of your own party, wasn't it?
Yeah, they were a bit, some of them didn't like it. Some of them told me later that, you know, you shouldn't have hugged him. But I disagreed. I said, no. I think the conversation, not only in India, the conversation on in the whole world, somehow people think that by hating other people, you'll get a solution. And I've seen in my own life that you simply won't get a solution. The only solution is through conversation. The only solution eventually is by talking to people and showing them that you understand where they're coming from.
So then let's see how much love we will get from the questions of the audience. So, as I mentioned, we have participants of this year's Butserio Summer School with us from 33 different countries from all over the world. But I would like to bring in not only participants, but also members of the audience as well. I would like to start with a member of our participants. Over there, Noura, please.
Thank you so much for this.
Am I allowed to walk up and down? Or?
Yes, of course.
Oh. Okay, but now I have to stand in honor of you coming.
Oh, you can't see. They can't see me. I guess I
With the
can.
lights. We
Please,
can
I'm
stand
sorry.
here.
Thank you so much for this most inspiring talk. I think in the world we live in today, we need more people like you to spread the love and remind us of what is truly important. My question is very simple and yet a complicated one. You cannot fight hate with hate, but how do you fight violence? Because today we see many parts of the world where there is violence. How would you suggest that we fight that?
The only way you can fight violence is with non-violence. There's no other way. It's the same. There's no other way. You might be under the illusion that you can fight violence with violence,
but it'll come back. You might think that you're very powerful and that you can subdue somebody else, but believe me, they'll find a way of coming back. Because violence is being caused because of a certain anger inside. Until you remove the anger, until you understand and remove the anger, it's going to remain there. So you can't fight violence with more violence. And of course, there are people out there who are so angry and so deeply infected by hatred that it'll take a huge effort. But I think that's the only way forward. That's the philosophy I believe in. Look, I've lost 2 members of my family. My grandmother and my father were both killed. So I've suffered violence. I'm talking actually from experience. I'm not talking without experience. And I can tell you that when you look at it properly, when you look at violence properly, there is only one way out of it. The only way you can move forward after violence is through forgiveness. There is no other way. And to forgive, you have to understand. You have to understand what exactly happened, why it happened. See, there is the common narrative is there is always someone at fault and someone who's not at fault. But if you go into the nuances, there are people at fault on both sides. And there are people trying to solve the problem on both sides. So it's working that. You will see in the 21st century, you will see a certain amount of violence. It's a result of the connectivity, it's a result of limited resources. You will see it. And you will have to deal with it. But the way to deal with it is to actually listen, is to actually, at least you, from your side, act non-violently. And people think that this is weakness. A lot of people think that if I react non-violently to your violence, this is weakness. But in fact, this is strength.
So the next one would be Melanie. And I can...
It's okay?
Thank you very much for your inspiring talk. I mean, you said you would also talk a little bit about India and the world, and spoke about like the more domestic political issues.
Can I interrupt you?
Yes.
I just want to answer. I just want to put a last answer to that, because it didn't. I needed to close that. See, my father was killed by a terrorist. Okay, he was killed in 1991. In 2009, I saw the person who killed my father lying in a field in Sri Lanka. Okay? And I called up my sister and I said to my sister, Priyanka, this is very strange, but I'm not happy. I should be celebrating that the person who's dead is the person who killed my father. But somehow I'm not happy. And she says, you know what, you're right, I'm not happy either. And the reason I wasn't happy was because I saw myself in his children. So I realized that him lying there actually means that there are kids like me who are crying. And he might have been a bad person, he might have been an evil person, whatever you want to call it. But the violence that was done against him was impacting others, like it had impacted me. So, if you want to truly get into it, you have to understand the person who's being violenced's perspective. You have to understand where that person is coming from. And if you go deep into it, you'll find that there is something that has triggered that violence. It's not just a random event. Some action, some violence done against him or her has triggered it. Sorry. Sorry about that.
No, I have to apologize because I will change the subject now completely. Yeah, coming from a very personal experience, even though it's not so personal, I would say, to a more global question. I mean, in the past 2 weeks, we spoke a lot about the future of the liberal world order and who are the allies on a global level. And I mean, you've also attended Bucerius summer school, so I mean, I think you're very well aware of what we could have debated about.
I have the notebook. I still have the notebook.
So where do you see India's role in the future when it comes to international relations? I mean, it's part of the BRICS countries and at the same time part of the IPSA countries, like the more democratic emerging markets. And I'm not so sure about which role India is going to play in the future. And I mean, from your party perspective, what role would you want India to play in the future?
I think there are a couple of potential visions out there. There is a American vision. There is a European vision. There is a Chinese vision. There is an Indian vision. There is a Islamic State vision. I mean, there are a bunch of visions that are competing. India has a relationship, strategic relationship with the United States. And India has a very deep set of ideas that we share with them. Democracy, freedom, etc. But India cannot ignore the fact that China is growing extremely fast and is going to shape the planet. So to me, India's role is actually to balance these two forces, much like Europe's. I think what would be the worst thing that could happen is that the Chinese and the United States get into a conflict. And I think that would be the absolute worst for the entire planet. And I think the Europeans and the Indians, because of their design, because of our design, are very well positioned to make sure that that conflict doesn't happen. From an Indian perspective, there are certain values like nonviolence, like compassion, like listening, that are going to become increasingly more important in the 21st century. You could get away in the 20th century by not listening to people, by using massive amounts of force against people. You can't do it in the 21st century because they will find a way to get back to you. So I think there are certain values that India brings to the table that are unique, and I think a lot of them were espoused by Mahatma Gandhi. They spread to South Africa, Mr. Mandela with Mr. King, Martin Luther King. So there is a very strong set of ideas that India brings to the table. But I think India's role and Europe's role would be one of balancing the narrative.
You mentioned the US, so I would like to bring in a voice from the US, David.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on that question and maybe press you a little bit on your answer to the last question, because in America, there's been a big shift in talking about the Asia-Pacific to now the Indo-Asia Pacific. And clearly the wager that the Trump administration is making and that people in security circles in America are making is that India is willing, able, and prepared to play a larger role in working with the US in Asia. But it sounds to me, based on your last answer, that India views itself as more of an honest broker or a balancer between the United States and China. So is India going to go between the two, or is it willing to play a more active role with the United States, Australia, Japan, and others to uphold the liberal order in Asia?
I mean, frankly, India is going to do what's in its self-interest, okay? But India has a relationship with the United States, and India shares a certain set of values with the United States. So yes, we are closer to the United States than we are to the Chinese. But the Chinese and the United States are both major players on the planet. And India, frankly, sees itself as similar. I mean, this might, I mean, we actually, to be blunt with you, someone asked an Indian leader, do you lean left or do you lean right? And she responded, no, we stand straight. So I think that's really the answer. What is in India's interest is what India will do. But we have a very good friendship with the United States.
I think we have time for 3 or 4 more questions. I would like to take somebody from the back. First from the back and then there. Yeah? So please, I think the very last row, you. Yes. And if you could shortly introduce yourself, who you are.
Hello, my name is Deepak Kapoor. I'm from India. I'm a Punjabi living in Hamburg for last 6 years, managing European operations of an Indian multinational here. There is so much talk about hugs, and I would like to experience one to feel it.
Sorry, you would like to experience?
One to feel it. You would like to experience one to feel it.
Oh, okay, there's no problem.
Now or later?
The opposition guys in parliament, they're very careful of me now.
So that was...
Sure, you come ahead.
Okay,
Come down, no
perfect, thank you.
problem. I have no issue. If it makes you happy, it makes me happy.
I promise to bring in you. Yeah. Thank you. So, over here, and if you could also introduce yourself.